it's actually allowing the truth of the moment to arise. And that is a practice in and of itself. How can I, in this moment, be so aligned as much as I can in my own integrity and belonging, allow a talking piece to hit me, and then allow for that listening, that deep listening, internal, for a story to arise or for what wants to be said. And it goes back to what you're saying about that collective bit. The circle process is not about any individual healing at all. The individual heals because the collective is healing.
Welcome to the Mystics Rising podcast. I'm Jen Riley, and I'm so excited to share with you Lillian Söderman. I had such a rich conversation with her, and I've gotten to know Lillian through a women's group that we're a part of that she's facilitating in a council style. This circle is a really beautiful expression of how collective healing happens through storytelling, and I love this practice of counsel, the inner workings of, speaking from your heart, speaking spontaneously in the moment, cultivating deep listening skills. And we follow the cycle of the wheel and go through the seasons collectively together and share what's coming up for us. It's been a really powerful experience. And so I was thrilled to get to know Lillian more in this episode and really get into the inner workings of counsel and how powerful and applicable this practice can be to so many different areas. Lillian's worked in prisons, worked with kids. Obviously, we're in a women's group, and it's really a practice for building community. And one of my favorite anecdotes in the show is how we can't feel fully safe in any community unless our shadows are being welcomed and all of our voices are being heard. And counsel is really a great practice for building community and building that awareness of all of our parts. Anyways, in the show, we go through a lot of these different parts of counsel. We also talk about her music career. We get into deep feminine healing and connecting to our womb and our roots. And I'm just thrilled to share this episode with you. Lillian has some circle counsel trainings coming up in March, and we'll provide all the links in the bio here. So enjoy the show and let us know if you have any comments. Okay. Well, welcome. Hi. Welcome, Lillian, to the show.
Nice to be here, Jen.
Yeah. I kind of want to just jump right into your story with counsel, because that's how I know you, as being this like amazing facilitator, container creator. And I've had so much curiosity around how did you come into counsel, and how has this been just kind of blossoming and informing your world?
Great question. I will try to practice one of the intentions of counsel, which is leanness. So counsel,
Maybe
I guess.
What is counsel? Maybe that would be good too, to just kind of presence for the audience.
Yeah, that's great. So counsel is a storytelling practice, a circle process. It's very, it shares a lot of other traditions as well. So I want to honor the indigenous traditions that it comes from. I, in particular, studied counsel with the Ojai Foundation. And we'll definitely give all these links somewhere in the show notes. But the Ojai Foundation is in Ojai, California. And this particular practice stemmed from that land and from indigenous elders there as well. But essentially, in a nutshell, the practice is individuals sitting in a circle, right? And we're all on an equal playing field, and you practice 4 intentions together. Those 4 intentions are to speak from the heart, to listen from the heart, to practice being spontaneous, and practice brevity or leanness. And I'll unpack those a little bit. But I think crucial to the practice itself, really, as you mentioned, a container, is that there's an opening to the process. We cross that threshold into what we would call like a liminal space, another way of being together in community. And then we always close the circle when we're done. But I say it's a storytelling process because as a facilitator, we offer prompts, and those prompts can be really simple. One of my favorite prompts that I've leveraged in the prison system a lot in my time is, what's the story of your name? And the amount of depth you get when people describe their names and how they got those names, and pain too. I mean, it's all there. And then maybe you have someone from different gangs sitting in that circle, and then they realize that they both had the same grandfather's name. And once people start to connect empathically with people, that lowers the chance for violence, right? So that's one of these ways of counsel as a community builder. It teaches skills of us being with each other, hearing each other's stories and seeing our stories and the stories of others. So that's it. And it's so funny. I've been doing it for a very long time, but my description of counsel changes every time.
Yeah. How long have you been doing counsel for?
So let's see. I used to be a social worker in Portland, Oregon, actually. So I was a trained alcohol and drug counselor. And at the time, that was around 2009, I was living with a friend, and he knew the work that I was doing. And he always kept telling me, you should sit and counsel with these kids, and I knew this particular friend, Jack, was a camp counselor from Colorado, which is where I went to university in Boulder. And he always kept talking about it. And fast forward to 2011, Jack actually passed away. And at his memorial service, that same camp director that he used to be a camp counselor for ran the whole funeral or service in a council circle. And it was so beautiful. And it was something that I felt like I've always known was this process that he walked us all through. And it was really just telling stories of Jack's life. One person would come in and take the talking piece and tell a story and go back to the main circle and in and out and in and out until the circle felt complete. And from that moment forward, I latched on. I ended up leaving Portland, did a training in August of that year, 2011, and decided it was time to move my life to LA, which was where the action was happening. And I was pretty fixated on the prison system at the time because a lot of the kids I was working with, they would go into prison and I didn't really have a lot of access. So I wanted to understand that system from a healing perspective. And moved to LA, and within about 3 years became a trainer, and we piloted counsel programs in 2 prisons there, and now it's in 24 prisons. It's really throughout the state of California now, that many years later, and that's being held by an organization called the Center for Counsel.
Wow, I didn't realize that you're doing so much work with the prison systems. I feel like part of what I love about counsel is like you're saying, like creating this container where we're coming in collectively together. And for me, there's something about like the collective consciousness, about like attuning to each other in that space. And there's something about the stories that are being shared in the container are like stories for all of us. And they touch different parts of our own stories. And so as we're like connected in circle, and someone's sharing whatever it is that they're sharing, like there's some kind of wisdom in there that's touching and into my healing. I'm curious how, and I feel like there's this like collective power too to come together and help like metabolize the parts of us that are so desperately wanting, needing healing, and just like if we don't create space, this has been coming up a lot for me. Like if we don't create space for healing, we just continue to get like, keep putting things under the carpet starts getting really lumpy. And it's like, what are we getting? When are we going to, make the time to clean it out? I'm so curious. And I feel like especially in a prison system, there's so much unhealed trauma. What a powerful way. And even like in the funeral scenario, again, like there's so much, I think like what wants to be metabolized in that space. And so like what a powerful way to bring that together. Yeah, I'm curious how has your work been in the prison system, and how has that grown and blossomed?
Hmm. I haven't worked or done circles in the prison system since I left LA. So I ended up leaving LA in 2015 to come back to Colorado. And I haven't been in the prison systems really since then. I think maybe I went back in 2016. But I recently reconnected with a lot of the inmates, the group that I worked with. They're all out and they were all lifers. And then California went through a new law that was passed that allowed people that had life sentences to potentially get parole. And so all of them actually paroled out. They're all out as of last year, 2021. So one of which is actually becoming a counsel trainer and should be quote unquote dubbed a counsel trainer by the Ojai Foundation this year. So that's been huge to have it come full circle this year. One of them interned with me on one of the trainings that I did, and huge learning, and I think I've held those circles in so many different settings, right? Like I work for corporate America. I finagle the council circle to hold a container in corporate America that makes sense, right? And then the circle can be in the prison system. In LA, I worked at the high schools, and we would do rites of passages that were based in the same council process. So really the process itself is just so simple. It's where are we trying to create community? And you create community through story. And just like you said, the practice, and we call it a practice because it's hard to sit and listen. And that's why those are the intentions, right? It's to sit and listen. And when I train people in the process, or for folks that want to learn to facilitate, I always have the images that the acuity that I need to listen is that every single person's story is my medicine, or is like the herb that I'm making this perfect tea for me in that moment. And I'm one of those people that I've chosen to look at my life not from a narcissistic standpoint, but I do believe that everything is a mirror back to my own healing. So each person's story, like you said, you speak my story, and vice versa. And that is, I think, one of a major wound that we all share, is that sense of not belonging to ourselves and each other. So the moment that you say something like, you took the words out of my mouth, I don't even have to say it anymore. There's just this relief. And I think the healing and the terror of these circles, I mean, my goodness, when I first started sitting in them, I would have a panic attack because I'd never really allowed myself to be seen in this fullness or in this way. So it took me a long time just to hold the talking piece and find my voice. And I see that with a lot of people. I see it where the talking piece reaches them and they just burst into tears because it's the first moment that they've realized they've been listened to in a really deep way. So healing across the board. I mean, I don't practice any religion anymore. I definitely have studied a lot of religions in my life and was raised Christian. For me, counsel, this practice is my religion. It's the closest thing that I have where those intentions, never end. The counsel circle for me doesn't end. We're in counsel right now. It's just a dyad. It's not with a group. So again, those 4 intentions of speaking from the heart, listening from the heart, being spontaneous, not planning what I'm going to say, and then the leanness, which again, not practicing that so well right now, but those are things that I live by.
Yeah. I don't know why the part about the spontaneous piece like really sticks out for me, because I feel like it almost kind of touches into the like speak from the heart. It's almost like one in the same. And I've just been noticing like in myself, like lately, like there's like the wanting to be like, oh, well, and it's something I even preach with my daughter, right? We want to speak with kindness, right? And there's like a level of filtering, of processing of, and I feel like there's also like space to get stuck in the constructs of the mind. And there's also like this incredible freedom to just speak spontaneously from the heart, not knowing what's actually going to come out, and knowing that there's some kind of safe, like judgment-free container to honor and hold. And it's deeply releasing to just spew in lack of a better word, or in some ways, spew or vent, or even like channeling the divine, in that aspect. It's when we place our thought on it. Yeah, curious how that spontaneity has, like, how have you honored that in yourself, or how have you maybe seen that come out alive in these circles?
Spontaneity is a hard one, right? Because as that talking piece is going around the circle, you want to plan what you're going to say, right? I'm going to give you a prompt, be it, what's the story of the biggest risk you've ever taken or not taken, right? Like, what is that prompt that's going to elicit as many stories and create as much belonging as possible? And then how do I not plan and actually allow the person's story that's sitting right next to me, or if we're popcorning, to allow the story to arise the moment I get the talking piece. And if I had $1 for every time someone in the circle, the moment the talking piece hit them, they'll say, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of this story in 20 years, or I haven't remembered this story ever. This story is coming to me from my childhood. That's the power of this. And I've seen it, like I said, countless times. It doesn't mean that I also don't see people's hearts pounding through their shirts as the talking piece comes around the circle, right? And I do these all on Zoom now, right? Since COVID. And it's still the same thing. I mean, people start fidgeting, they're moving around, knowing that the next square is you. Right. But spontaneity in general, like when I think about true spontaneity and when I'm finding that or not finding it in myself, it's actually allowing the truth of the moment to arise. And that is a practice in and of itself. How can I, in this moment, be so aligned as much as I can in my own integrity and belonging, allow a talking piece to hit me, and then allow for that listening, that deep listening, internal, for a story to arise or for what wants to be said. And it goes back to what you're saying about that collective bit. The circle process is not about any individual healing at all. The individual heals because the collective is healing. So when I'm facilitating these spaces, I am really listening for a collective story that's emerging or a collective theme. I'm trying to find all these different patterns of shares, or at least feel into the circle. And I know that sounds woo-woo. It really is not. It's sometimes those themes just slap you in the face because everyone's saying the same thing. But how do we align to that listening, that even the whole collective group can move spontaneously into a new place of healing that particular group needs, whether they meet regularly or not, right? A little bit of a roundabout way that the spontaneous piece, that doesn't end. That can in and of itself be a practice that you sit with for a long time of how do we live spontaneously? How do I let the moment inform my next step? And that's risky, and that feels scary. And that means that you're actually acknowledging that every moment I face is unknown, as much as we love control. And tell me, I love control.
It's the most delicious illusion.
Yeah. Oh, all the ways that I control. You should see how clean my house is, all my notes and my lists. And I let myself do that still. I'm not going to take that away. It's a strong container for me. But yeah, being spontaneous, especially when life is throwing the unknown in your face, as it has for all of us collectively for the past 2+ years, hard to keep that spontaneousness there and actually listen to what is arising.
I love this. Like, I mean, it's like a deeper calling into presence, to actually be present to the moment versus the future or the past or whatnot, but just like listening to what's arising in us in the moment is like, I think of like mindfulness practices, right? Like coming back to the breath. It's like, oh, I'm drifting, come back to presence. Oh, I'm drifting, come back to presence. And it is almost like a muscle memory, right? Like an awareness memory of like how we keep coming back. And it is so it's so scary. And like for me, it's almost been like these moments where I'm like, logically, I know I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and just whatever is arising in me in the moment is like, like I can't, like not right now. Even in like I've had like a work situation where I'm like, God, I really know I need to get this PowerPoint done. And but I just know they're not going to have time for it. And so they're like getting more clear on listening to like the inner voice, and sure enough, like, yeah, we didn't have time for it. And I just had this like inner knowing. I think a mutual friend of ours, Jim Anderson, he talks about like with intuition, like how many data points do you actually need? If we were looking at like a spreadsheet of data of like all the times my intuition like spoke up and I listened to it and and was right, versus all the time my intuition spoke up and I didn't listen. It's like, how many times does it have to go awry in the data to actually say like, oh, maybe I should try listening to my intuition on a more regular basis?
Sometimes humans need that data, which is, I get it, right? They want the data points to prove the efficacy of something. And we had to prove those data points to the prison system too. I mean, no one's going to roll this out in a government. Like, what are we teaching inmates, for instance, or why are we doing rites of passage work with high school students? It's because it teaches X, Y, and Z. It teaches someone emotional intelligence, that internal listening. It teaches group consciousness or social skills that oftentimes a lot of people don't have, and we've certainly lost in the last 2 years. But I mean, going back to what you said, to me, like another description of counsel, which my original trainer, John McCluskey, who's been doing it for decades, it's a group mindfulness practice. It's a group meditation practice, if you really think about it. Just like you said, we pay attention to, oops, I forgot that I'm breathing. I'm back to my breath now. It's the same grace that you give yourself in that moment when you're listening and you're like, oops, I've been planning my story, back to this person's story. Oops, back to this story. And that is also an internal compass of knowing where your blocks are. You will see people fall asleep in circles. And I think our ability from a somatic perspective, when it comes to trauma, some people fall asleep right at the right time because they're not ready to hear that story. Their body isn't ready to take in that story, or they'll blank out, right? So I think it's a good tool to see where we're checking in and where we're checking out, or where the things are that I hear things all the time and I'm like, nope, don't want to deal with that. Or the relationship that I was in that wasn't right for years and years. And I still was like, nope, not ready to listen to that voice yet. Or I hear the voice and I'm not really ready to do anything with it. Right. And I think that's every human process of change, especially in the face of the unknown, which, if we really acknowledge it, we're always there. There is no tomorrow. There is no past. Yeah. And I think, our bodies know. I'm really in a learning curve of trusting my body and really bringing that into the practice too. The way that I've grown as a facilitator and a trainer over the last decade plus of, I'm someone with my own, trauma in my body that I'm still working on it. The more that I bring my body to the practice, the more that listening is also like, oh, I feel my own heart here. I feel my own sweaty hands. What's that about? Or just that checking in of, if my knee wanted to tell a story right now, what might it tell? Or really like being fully there and inviting that full body presence there from everyone as much as you can. That's definitely an edge of learning for me, because it's an edge for me in my own discovery of feeling safe enough to occupy my body in this space and the world in my life. I mean, that's a huge, it's another level of finding my voice and bringing myself to the circle, bringing myself to the community that I serve. So always, there isn't anything that the learning never ends with this particular practice. And that's why we call it a practice. It's just like you said, it is a muscle, just like mindfulness is a muscle. You get better and better and better and better at it by practicing it. But the practice never ends until we end, and then we don't really know what happens from there. We're trying, but
I love the somatic piece. I find that like I love what you're saying, like if my knee, like especially like in counsel, like is my knee really activated? Is that it saying like it has a story to share in this moment? And what happens when I bring my awareness into my knee and like what unfolds in that space. I've had some very profound realizations, awakenings, just in my own healing journey of coming into the body. I'm curious, like you mentioned a couple of things of just bringing more awareness, like when you're in council, are there any other practices or ways that you've just kind of opened you up to having more somatic awareness?
Hmm. The first one that comes to my mind, I was so lucky to be introduced to a pelvic floor specialist.
Mm.
Her name's Sydney Zwicker. And for those that are listening that don't know pelvic floor work, oftentimes you're sent to like physical therapy for pelvic floor work after you've had a baby or if you're having incontinence issues. But Sydney's philosophy and a lot of practitioners in this field are like, we should be paying attention to our pelvic floor, whatever gender you identify as. Like, this is a root in your body, and oftentimes, especially, I'm just going to speak from the woman experiences as I identify. I've been cut off from that root, right? I mean, that's where a lot of trauma has occurred, especially my relationship to my sexuality and coming into my body in this world, which is quite unsafe still for women. But really learning to tune in to that part of my body, like the lowest root that I know, and like your womb and your stomach and your gut. And those are places, like I said, everyone has different sensations when you're sitting in a circle, but your stomach, you might start feeling nauseous. Like I said, heart palpitations, sweaty palms, all of these sensations in our body that we attach story to. So again, it goes back to that spontaneity of removing the past, removing what we are projecting onto the future. What does the pelvic floor want to say? What does like this aching knee that just started aching after this person started telling a story? Can the talking piece hit me? And then I remember a day that I fell and it, like, no one helped me, or, I was on the playground and there was a trauma that occurred or something, right? I'm just making up a story, but
Yeah.
to allow that spaciousness to be there and that presence with the body. But I think pelvic floor work changed my life. I mean, I don't think I know that it did, from just getting me into my body and trusting someone enough to help me locate grounding in that way, right? We often hear grounding practice of go put your feet in the earth. Well, if there wasn't so much snow, I'd be doing that. But, go put your feet in the earth, feel that rootedness. For me, it's really connected to that. Like, whew, I want to connect to my womb. I want to connect to that center of creativity where I can create life. So that was huge for me. And that really changed the course of how I facilitate, honestly. And that I came into that work about a year ago.
Wow. Yeah, the connecting into the womb is really powerful. I've gotten really into honoring my cycle. And there's a piece of when I first start menstruating, that it's like this almost like the pain, it's not even like a pain, but this like aching, right? That happens. And right before, I feel like the day before, I feel a little bit flighty, like I'm a little all over the place. And all of a sudden, like when I get the menstruation, like when it drops, it is the most grounding, clarifying like force in my whole cycle. And like that moment is just like I am, and I love that. Like I'm like, I'm so in my body, I am so present with my body, that I really appreciate that just that awareness and connection has completely changed how I look at my cycle. And yeah, I'm really curious, like with like, are there any tips for pelvic floor work, or for anyone trying to get into like what does just like be more in touch with the actual, like, with your muscles, like in the movement, and um like I know with their like yoni eggs, like kind of like a
Mhm.
similar practice of grounding through different crystals, and just having, I think, like more awareness, like I said, like even when when I'm menstruating, it's like this, connection and awareness of like what's happening in my body. I don't think we have, or often we don't, or I haven't in the past certainly had a lot of awareness of like, what is happening in my womb. And there is so much connection, and I feel like that's like when we're talking about grounding on the earth, like that's where we're in some ways like absorbing that root energy. And if we have
Mhm.
like a blockage there, then we're trying to ground, but it's really difficult to root in.
Yeah, and I will, I mean, after those sessions, I mean, usually they're like 2-hour sessions. And this, and I will mention, I'm forgetting her name right now, but the book is Wild Feminine, and a lot of people were trained in her philosophy with it. And maybe her name will come to me, but we can add it in the show notes. After those sessions, my story would change. I mean, there is such thing as speaking from your heart, right? And sometimes there's whatever you might associate that. And when I teach kids counsel, I'm always like, let's take our ears off of our head and let's put them on our heart now. Let's take our mouth and put them on our heart now. Like we're all dropping in here, and
That.
since I've been doing pelvic floor work, I've changed that a little bit, where I'm like, wherever you feel your truth or your gut, like take your ears off and put them there. I'm a very visual person, so images help, of like mouth off. And sometimes we can move those locations where we're speaking from. And for me, after those pelvic floor sessions, if I'd take a question in, or if I was sitting in a place that I needed to have healed, I have voice recordings of after those sessions where it was so clear that I was speaking from this ferocity. And this is just my experience, but there's a
Yes.
ferocity at that root that is fierce. And I think that, as they say, like the mama bear, and that of course it could be the papa bear energy too, but um, whoa. I mean, there was a clarity, and it's almost like a ruthless clarity
Mm.
and protection for my own life and my own boundaries. So for my experience, boundaries come from my pelvic floor. So I really got to be kind of continually checking in with my body, that when I need to set a boundary, I am rooting, like really rooting, and putting that sword in the ground or drawing the line in the sand. Um, and I like that ruthless quality. That's a ruthlessness for my own protection, and my own safety that I had to learn to cultivate. I wasn't raised in that safety, and it took me a long time to feel safe here, and a lot of work. And counsel really, I mean, largely has been one of the main things that allowed me to feel safe in a community, seen in a community. And I still find my edges. I still find my edges where I start to panic because I'm being seen in a new place that I still might have a block to, that I didn't know about. But I want to know the blocks. Like I want to understand what's keeping me from showing up fully in this world, in service. I mean, I feel very clear that I have signed that contract, so what do I have to do to get out of the way so I can be in service to healing while I'm here, and healing for my ancestors to come, if I do decide to have children. How do I clean up the cords? We all come from so much trauma, and it's all in our bodies, regardless of whether we had a happy childhood or not. You're carrying your great grandmothers and your great, 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 great. So I feel like it's harder for the healthy. Like when I see my brother raise my nephew, and I'm just astounded by my nephew. He's 7, his emotional intelligence. I'm like, wow. And I keep thinking, whoa, you're going to have to do big work in this life. If you've already got these, it took me 34 years to get that skill. And now I'm trying to clean up some ancestor trauma, but whoa.
Oh God, I resonate so hard with every bit of what you just said. I mean, I feel like I have a 6-year-old, and that has been my biggest calling forward. The child is so much my spiritual guide in this world, and so my passion. I mean, I always had like a passion, but there was a ferocity to the passion when I had her. Of the trauma ends here, I must become way more clear with what's happening internally. I'm saying something to her, or she said something to me that I'm like, dang, yeah, it took me 30 something years to figure that out. And she's 6, and she's like, it's okay, mommy, I can be with you in your sadness. And I'm just, oh, like, thank God. Like, wow, like it took me a long time for it to be okay for me to be with my sadness. And yeah, I just feel like there's such a calling right now to healing the generational wounds. And I guess like even kind of tying this all together, like
I've had some, maybe in the past 6 months, some like deeply profound healing and awareness of my own generational wounds. Like I'm one of the first women in my lineage to like financially care for herself, which I didn't even realize of being like such a big issue. But I actually, my period was late. This like connection to my ancestors and like to this like almost rage of giving men our power, that like, you know, it's not just mine that I'm holding. It's like a wound that, you know, has gone far, far back in my specific ancestry. I know it's a collective wound that many women hold. And just like there was this like reclaiming of this power and this connection to my wound space. Like, so when you're talking about boundaries, like coming for your wound and this ferocity, like there is like that voice of like, and it, to me, it's almost like the boundaries and creating safety because I am a sacred being, you know, like that, like I need to be cared for. And I had been projecting my innocence, like projecting my sacredness onto others, that like, oh, I need to protect others, but, you know, put others first versus protecting myself. And this like coming home to can and have the ability to be empowered and to protect myself, to honor myself, to welcome my innocence in and hold it with such love and such care. Um, yeah, I just feel like that was a really profound moment of coming home. It took a lot of healing to even bring awareness to even hold space for that.
Mm-hmm. And we can't hold space for others until you hold space for yourself. It's like the age old cliche of you only love others as much as you can love yourself. So when I think of myself as a facilitator of these spaces, I'm only holding the wideness of the container that I have allowed internally. And I'll never be fully healed. You know, I'm not trying to get enlightened in this life. I think that that's why I'm doing things like circles and holding them in as many spaces as possible, because the world needs it so much. I mean, it goes back to this collective awakening that's happening. We're hungry for it. And going back to honoring the elders in the indigenous cultures from which it came, there was a time when circle was a part of culture. And that was largely what Western civilization, you know, took over from, especially, I can only really speak to Native tribes here in America, but I want more circles in our culture. I want to start shifting group consciousness, you know, and again, the West is so individual, right? And we've talked about that before, you know, psychology of like the individual person. But for me, I mean, I left that world of individual kind of counseling to group. And it's not even group counseling. It's not even looking to me. I am not a therapist. It's looking to the group for the healing. It's looking to, you have the story that we all need, even in your wounded place. And I kept thinking you were saying womb and wound, and I was interchanging them, and it didn't matter, right? Because that gift, as they say, comes from that place. Once you can really tap in, whether it's your womb, your wound, wherever those exist. And we all have like a core wound, you know, whether it's our childhood or whether we start going really far back and we realize, no, this happened to my grandmother when my mom was in the womb, right? And it's endless. I see it as all these tree branches and roots together. And sometimes that's really, you know, depending on my state, I can go into a library and just be so excited. And then sometimes I walk into a library and I realize that I'm never going to read all of the books, and I start to feel panicky and I leave. So it depends on my attitude in that moment. But again, I go back to kicking and screaming that I have signed a contract somewhere that I am going to heal as much as I possibly can in the face of whatever is being presented to me, in hopes that I, as an individual, can shift culture wherever I go. If I can hold a circle here and shift a container, shift safety. And I always say, any circle I hold, this is not a safe space. That was a big thing, especially back in like 2009. You know, I lived in a collective and we had signs up that said, this is a safe space. And it's huge right now, especially in the movements that have been happening as of late. But I've really started being like, this isn't safe. I cannot guarantee you that the circle that you sit in is going to be safe for you. Sure, we will try our best to leverage language that is safe, and I will correct anyone if something feels racist, or if there's any transphobic moments, and the list continues. But I cannot guarantee you that the story that you're going to tell is not going to trigger you like crazy.
Yes.
So I say, and the person that I train with often, we say, this is a brave space. We are going to do our best to show up with grace for ourselves and grace for others. And if someone missteps or someone's story really triggers you, I'm going to trust that you can protect and maintain your own boundaries and safety. And I will also step in to the degree that I am able to help as well. But healing is not safe feeling. Healing is feeling those feelings in your body that you dissociated from when the wound first happened, whether you knew it or not. This is not safe feeling work. It is terrifying. And that's why so many people don't do it, right?
Wow. I love that, because I have, and I've even used that, like, oh, it's a safe space to be all of who you are. I mean, that is true. And we want to welcome all the parts of you, right? Like the ones that have the terrible voice, the mean voice, the bully, like we want to welcome all of them to come out and to be shared, because it is like what we touch fully dissolves. And there's this, it almost feels like double speak, like it's a safe space. No, it is a brave space. You have to have so much courage to show up with vulnerability.
Oh.
Yeah. And I love that, like, because it's funny because Jim Anderson's our connection, but I have like so many Jimisms like in me right now. But like one of my favorite things that he talks about, asshole universities, kind of shift the narrative of how dare this person trigger the shit out of me, to like, oh, this is a part of asshole university. This asshole has just awakened a part of me that's like not healed. That just like, that's like just like when we are triggered, that's just an indicator of a place that's unhealed. And to be thankful of when that arises, bringing more grace to the process of our healing and normalizing healing versus, I think there's so much in culture now of like praising individuals and groups for being quote unquote good, right? For not touching into the depth of their, emotions, to disassociating and keeping things more linear, keeping things going. And I love having a brave space to be vulnerable and to be scared shitless.
Yeah, vulnerability sucks. I mean, that's part of the contract that I signed, but I'm like, this work sucks. And I don't blame people when they shut down to it and when they dissociate from it. It feels awful. And like you said, it takes a lot of courage to stay in it, or to retell the story that like, this is the oldest trigger I know, or like, I feel like I'm dissociating from reality right now. And I always go back to, and I love that your podcast is called Mystics Rising. When I was working with the homeless population as a counselor, I would encounter schizophrenia a lot. I would encounter serious mental health issues or abilities, really, honestly. And yeah, there was a beautiful book that I read that said that mystics and psychotic individuals are in the same waters. One has learned to swim and the other one is drowning. So I always found this, how can I, as this individual that's in service to this group of people, create the skill sets for one to realize that they can start swimming? Like how can we teach these swimming capabilities? Because oftentimes, and I don't want to detract too much from the conversation to mental health, but it is like this larger cultural issue that when someone is experiencing psychosis or a break from reality, more often than not, they're spiritual in nature. And if you look at the DSM-5, yes, a lot of the qualities are grandiosity, in touch with God, or thinking that you're God. They're very spiritual in nature. And we as a culture don't really have a place for that. In Finland, the way that they approach mental health, like they got rid of the diagnosis for schizophrenia. They approached mental health with circles, and they surrounded those individuals with circles. and a deep, deep listening of what reality is it that you're experiencing right now, and how do we create belonging in the community for you. And that goes back to cultures having circles. That goes back to cultures like Martin Prechtel talks about in his Grief and Praise, that in Mayan culture, if someone is in a deep state of grief, you give them a bottle of tequila and the whole community goes out to the ocean. That person drinks the whole bottle of tequila until they're sick and they're retching and they're throwing up. And the community is sitting in a circle around that individual. And the container is held for that person to go through whatever they need to, dig in the sand, scream in the mud, get covered in life's messiness. And we as a community will witness it. But unfortunately, our culture is so uninitiated because the individuals are afraid, as they should be. It's hard work to initiate themselves. You know, we can't be a culture of initiated people without initiated individuals that are stepping into that contract with themselves, that we can hold all of it. And I think that goes back to the circle practice too. Like, this circle holds it all. When I ask a prompt of tell about the most joyful time in your life or not joyful, you know, you think you're going to have a celebration circle, and then someone's, you know, especially kids, someone's like tells a story about their cat dying. And then now the whole circle is talking about their cats and all of their animals that have died, and everybody's crying. And you're like, well, I guess the whole group needed to cry today. I did the best I could. I heard the prompt was tell about a happy time. But we got to let it all in. You know, that's why we have all the repression and the projection and the darkness of this culture. But it goes back to the gratitude that you were talking about. I have a lot of gratitude that Trump came around, because it showed us the underbelly of the beast. It showed us, and now we have language about rape culture. We have the language front and center about transphobia. We have things that were just closeted before, except in communities that were really trying to bring that to the surface. We have the person here that has brought the underbelly of the beast and the work to the forefront. I'm grateful for it. And then I have some fierce feelings about what that individual holds, but micro is macro and macro is micro.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, where does Trump live in me? Which I know is an unpopular opinion an unpopular inquiry into the self. But I have a friend that always like brings that up. What we are most triggered by, there's some flavor of it like living in us. And so how can we open more, whether they're external systems, internal systems, like it's all the micro and the macro.
Mm-hmm.
It was fine when you said, I was so touched by when you said, you know, can we teach people how to swim in this water? I was touched by, I know you just released an album. I think it's called Like Water, is like, that's one of the lyrics where like, are people, you know, in the ocean, like, do you sink or do you swim? And like water to me is obviously like in many, many different contexts, like the viscosity, like the heaviness of our emotions, and it can be calm and it can be stormy. And are we sinking or swimming in our emotions? And I really appreciate kind of just really bringing into light, illuminating this concept around depression, because I think there is absolutely, you know, there is absolutely like chemical depression and things that people are experiencing. And there's also this like huge cultural shadow that you can't be sad. So if you're sad, there must be something wrong, like an aversion to hard feelings, you know. And I think we see it with kids too. It's like, oh, okay, like you're upset. Well, have a candy, you know, watch a TV show. Like we must distract you from the feelings so that, you know, because being with you in the sadness or this grief or whatever you're going through is like not okay. We don't have time for it. You know, we have busy, we have to go to work, we have to go to school, we have to go to karate or whatever's going on. We don't have time to stop and just be sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we can't hold that space unless we hold it for ourselves, you know. And I recently lost my father, and as much as I've trained myself on grief, and I volunteered in hospice for years, I've been around death and dying. And my father was the first person who I helped leave this world. You know, I was with him as he transitioned. But it's been such an interesting process to see who's shown up in my grief. And who has been unable, right? I mean, I know, and that's okay. I'm not pointing fingers, and everyone shows up in different ways, and people show up as they would support themselves. And I've had people say, like, look, I hope you don't think I'm MIA. When I lost my father, I just wanted to back away from everyone, and I want to give you space, and then there have been others that have shown up in different ways. And again, we show up as we show up for ourselves. And sometimes that's not always great. And just like you said, our whole culture pushes away shadow, it pushes away taboo, it pushes away these things that, that's why priests in the Catholic faith are, so many of them violate people's sexual boundaries, right? Like what we push away is pushing back at us with equal force. It is physics. It is the basis of reality, really, from a scientific perspective. So equal force in both directions. So what we repress is what's going to come forward, or what we project is ours. But this way of living, I mean, that takes a lot of integrity. And I guess that's another core word from a contract perspective that I've agreed to, whether I knew I did it or not. But how do I be in integrity and alignment with myself, in service to the greater good? Oh, that's a lot of work. And it's continual mirroring, and it's continual relating to the moment and what's arising, even when it sucks. Like, it's just, I mean, if I would choose not to have my father here, or say I would choose to have my father here versus what I went through and what I'm still going through. But I know that apparently this is the next lesson, right? I would choose for him to have a different wife than he had picked, a second marriage. And it is hell. I am in a living hell right now. And again, it goes back to Trump. It's like, this is my teacher. This is my teacher. And I think in my own growth over the years, I was too quick to compassion, too quick to find compassion, because I was too uncomfortable to feel rage and anger. And I've really learned to embody that rage and that anger. And I'm going to stay in my anger until it's done, and let my body process it, or else it's going to get locked away somewhere. I'm going to get a tumor somewhere, or I'm going to get blood cancer like my father had, right? I want my poor body. I've already put my body through so many things. I still do. How do we heal and take each lesson in each moment as a healing opportunity? Oof, it is not fun.
No.
Always, but it's full of joy. Like, it's full of, in the last month, or, I lost him on the winter solstice, speaking of winter. And yeah, I've experienced the most joy I've ever had in my life, to the depths of grief I've never known, and I feel pretty clear that he needed to leave at this point in my life for me to step into another part of my initiated path as an adult.
I just want to first just, and I know we've shared this before, but just my heart just wants to hold you in this grief, and just really appreciating your showing up with your vulnerability and sharing how this has touched you. And
Thank you.
Yeah. And the compassion is giving yourself space to be fucking angry, and to be like this sucks. Like, the compassion is to just allow yourself to be angry and sad, and however it is coming in and through you.
Yeah. And we have a lot of those spiritual. That's why I don't really like to say I'm spiritual. I don't want to co-opt any words that are not mine from a cultural appropriation perspective. But we have a lot of people that get stuck in the light of spirituality. Yes. And man, I feel so much like I have a lot of energy to talk about a boundary towards that, because the antithesis of it is true. We can get stuck in this psychedelic world of beauty and light, and we haven't integrated the shadow. And to me, that is not safe. My body does not feel safe in spaces where I know the shadow is not present and fully celebrated, where it has the space to come forward. And again, that's just a way I think our culture is evading some hard work. But it goes back to the child. It goes back to teaching our children to be with it all. Like, if I do get to raise a child someday, Like that is maybe the one thing that I want to teach, is all of it is okay. And even with my nephew, sometimes I find my pull yourself up by your bootstraps, what my dad used to tell me, like, don't, like, get up, like, keep pushing, and I push myself too much. I push myself into an autoimmune disorder. I push my body in ways that, like, I've paid for it, and I'm trying to reverse some of that. But I even in being with him find my edges of allowing him to be sad for as long as he wants to be sad, allowing him to drag his feet because he was really disappointed that I didn't give him orange juice or something, right? So I still find, the moment that my life wants to allow me to be a mother, that's going to be work.
Yeah.
All moments are probably leading to that one.
Oh, that's another passion of mine, raising wholeness, like raising kids in their wholeness, and working to, hold a deeper space for ourselves as role models, right? And then for what's coming alive in kids. I just feel like, imagine a whole world where it was okay to be with all the emotions, the full spectrum. I think something else that you were saying that's coming alive in me now too is this whole piece of like embracing the shadow, like a community that doesn't embrace the shadow doesn't feel safe. And I feel like that's like, there is this kind of cultural wound around belonging right now that I think is very present. And I feel like when you said that, that really hit true in me as like one of the roots of this wound of belonging, of like, why don't we feel like we belong? Like we're all we have a million different communities that we can join and show up into. And like, why aren't we feeling that we belong in them? Oh, because there's been this cultural shadow around shadow.
Yeah, it's very true. I've been trying to get something off, or I've been trying to write a book probably my whole life, but it's definitely like Krista Tippett has on being, mine's like on belonging. It's and like I have the website, I have everything there. It's my container for the counsel practice that I do, but that's what I called it because this is about belonging. It's about every piece of me belonging to myself, and then how to bring that fully to the community and to be in service with whatever it is that I feel like the gifts that I have to bring. But that takes a lot of inquiry to figure out, what am I holding and what am I bringing? And then allowing it to change. It does change. Like you said, like I'm a musician and I think I'll probably always be a musician. And that's an aspect of my service to the world. But who knows what can emerge of a gift that I don't know about yet, because I haven't found a wound that I don't know about yet. And I might bring that forth as a gift. So may we find all the gifts. It's not just one.
So yes, it's like every wound has a gift. And so there's this like forever, they're just like forever wounds. I mean, I don't want to be like, get into inner work. You'll forever have stuff to do, but you will. I mean, like that, I feel like that is to me, at least, like the journey of life and like why we're here playing the game, of life. And just like to continuously deeper integrate, know ourselves, cultivate these gifts. And it's like every level you like level up in some ways, right? It's like, okay, like what are we integrating now? I guess so when I hear that from you, what arises in me is what do you feel like is most arising and coming through you in this moment? Like what's most alive in you? I know you have music and you have counsel and you're moving maybe across the world and you have this corporate job. Like, what's calling you most in this moment?
It goes back to just, it's a phrase I've been using for a couple of months now. Like, who am I becoming? I really don't know. I know like that I am aligned with myself, but I don't know where I'm going to take my alignment. I do have a very big question mark about my future right now. And I think I just really am trying to practice with being with what's here. And I think that that's also deep grief. I mean, this grief that I haven't known yet, and I'm being shook up on parts that I am, sometimes I'm like, I don't think I'm okay. And then sometimes I feel like I'm okay. And I'm just trying to be with it and allow it to be there. When the rage wants to be here, move it and be with it, and shift when it shifts. And so I think it's really being present with myself for what is now. And that could mean going back to Colorado, buying my apartment, but still moving to London and trying to get in touch with more ancestry there and ancestral lands. And but I know that I need the skill set to really practice a deep listening. And I have those practices, like I said, pelvic floor work. I also practice vision questing or vision fasting, where you are out on the land for 4 days and 4 nights without food, and you're just listening. You're listening to the land as the teacher, and that's your mirror for where you need to go. And so I do those probably annually now, but I'm doing another one on my ancestral lands in August. And I feel like everything is leading towards that severance. And I just did one last summer, so I'm still incorporating that. So I feel like I'm being squeezed on both ends of my life to not only incorporate that and incorporate the death of my father, but to also prepare to once again sever from the life that I know up to this point and go to the mountain and say, what do you want from me? Like, how can I show up more fully in this moment? Who am I becoming? How can I better hold community internally and externally, and then see who I come back as? I don't know who I'm going to come back from the mountain as. And deep gratitude to cultures that, there have been vision fasts around the world for millennia, and every culture has it. We all know that type of rite of passage. We all know the thing that is going to initiate us into a better human, or allow the space for our better humanness to emerge. And big gratitude to cultures that have and remembered those, and to organizations that bring it forward for modern day to practice. It's a big practice for me to sit with the work.
I love, yeah. First of all, I just want to celebrate you. And just really hit this home, is that this point of just the seasons, right? Like the trees let go of their leaves every fall, and they and new leaves grow. And so I feel like there's a lot of our culture that wants to cling to the leaves, to cling, if all the leaves were different identities that we hold, different skills that we've accumulated, different, parts of our being, that there's a season to let go of all that and allow a new version of yourself to emerge, and to just create space and normalizing that we need to let that go. And just, really want to celebrate your, I want to say dedication to this letting go phase, and allowing yourself to come into whatever phase is next in your life.
Yeah, thank you. You caught me in a moment where I'm not kicking and screaming, and I feel pretty surrendered to it. But yeah, I have a lot of compassion, even for the people that have made my life hell, or continually are being very big sources of challenge. It's really brought a lot of compassion to the forefront, that it takes a lot of work to let people love you. And it's a moment that I'm celebrating, that I learned how to let people love me. And there's a great, I think it's a Rumi poem, or no, it comes from Coleman's translation of a bunch of different mystics, but Love Poems from God is the book. And there's a poem in there, and I'll find it for you. But essentially, it's every action is just someone asking for you to love them, all of the actions. And, in my compassionate places, when I'm done raging as I need to because of the behavior that is coming towards me, or the boundaries that I need to set for my own safety. But in those moments, I can still love from a distance, and wonder, wow, you must be in so much pain to be behaving in that way. And you really need love. And I might not ever be the safety or the circle that will help you feel that love, or you might die without, your wound might be too great that you might die leaving this world not having been fully loved. But I will be fully loved in the circles that I run in. I hope that I will continue to create those spaces for for more love to exist, I suppose, as cheesy and cliche as it sounds.
Nope, that was beautiful. That was really, I really resonate with the piece of like it is a practice to receive love. And it takes work to receive love.
So hard. It's so hard. And you think it would be easier, but it really,
it's almost harder
really, really hard
to receive than it is to give.
Yep. And again, bringing us full circle, I know we're almost at time, but that's the practice of circle practice for me. Like really belonging is loving all of our parts of ourselves. And you got to be the one to bring it forward, or someone's story that you hear suddenly cracks you open and you don't really have a choice anymore. It's just there. So how can I create more circles wherever I go where people can just listen to other people's stories and learn to listen? And those can be the things that crack us and in the ways that we need to show up. Culture does not shift. There's not someone up here saying this culture is going to move this way. It's the individuals that have activated themselves and the culture will shift. It's the individual parents that raise the emotionally intelligent children that are our future. I vacillate between our world is going to hell, we're not going to make it. And then I remember, and I'm around, people like your child, Haley, and my brother's nephew, my nephew. I'm like, oh, we're going to be okay. I'm not going to be here. I'll be dead before that happens, but they're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And yeah, and maybe the planet will kick us off before then, and we'll all be present for that deep grief. But yeah, there's a collective deep grief right now, and I know how to be with it because it's in me too.
I so enjoyed this conversation. This was so much fun. I'm curious if you have more circles or if there's more things, ways for people to get in touch. We'll obviously include any links in the notes, but I don't know if you have anything coming up that you'd want to share or.
Yeah, I do have another online council training happening that kicks off in March. So I'll be sure to leave a link there. We break those out over like 4 Saturdays. They're awesome. And you'd be amazed. Like technology is an amazing thing that, of course, I love in-person trainings, but COVID obviously hasn't allowed for that. And they are impactful and they are powerful. And they fill up really quickly. So we just let this one go live and we only take 15 people just to keep the container strong. So and those happen on, kind of every 3 months. We do about 4 a year, different levels of that training. So that'll be happening. And as you mentioned, we'll leave links for the music and other ways that I'm bringing some gifts to the world. But yeah, those are the 2 that come to mind. But yeah, I'm so grateful for this conversation and the space that you created to allow whatever wanted to emerge that did emerge. Yeah.
Thank you. You can find more recordings, classes, and events on mystics-rising.com.